All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We are here today for SESI's first webinar, Empowering Your Staff, 10 Tips for Dealing with Those Challenging Behaviors in the Classroom. Again, this is a SESI webinar, and it is March 14th, 2013. And good afternoon. My name is Christy DiCarlo, and just to give you a little background, I've worked in special education for about 10 years now. And I've taught pretty much everything from elementary to middle to high school. So all of the tips that I'm going to be giving you today, I've personally used with all ages. I know exactly what it's like to have that challenging classroom, or maybe one student, or maybe you have a classroom full of them that just make you scratch your head every day. So let me start by thanking you for joining us here today. My hope is that in less than a half hour, you will be able to walk away with a bag full of tricks that can help you modify classroom behaviors. One thing I do want to note is that there is a place on your login for you to answer or ask questions. So feel free to do so throughout the webinar, and I'll make sure that if I don't have time to address them at the end, that I will absolutely email you a response. All right. So let's get started. Why did we decide to do a webinar? So we know how frustrating it can be at times for teachers who have those challenging students. Oftentimes they consume most of your time, and it happens to be both in and out of the classroom. So as teachers, we know how important it is to have those bags of tricks. And if one thing doesn't work, be ready to pull the next one out. So some of these tips that I'm going to be giving you today, they will require a little bit of extra time to create and implement for your classroom, but trust me, it will be worth it. So the question, why would a teacher want to go out of his way to really learn these tips? Okay, well, my answer to you is by applying these strategies, you'll be able to improve classroom culture, advance student achievement, and ultimately, and most importantly, you'll maximize learning time in your classroom. It will be worth it. Just to give you a little background of who SESI is, SESI stands for Specialized Education Services Incorporated, and for over 25 years, we've been partnering with school districts across the country. And we serve students with really intensive special and alternative education needs. If you guys ever want more information, you can go down and visit our website at www.sesischools.com. So let's jump right into behavior. We need to start by understanding student behavior, the big why. Why is my student acting this way? And I think to really begin to understand it, we need to figure out where it's coming from. So I came up with three sort of categories to kind of look at why is my student acting this way. The first one is attention or control. For some students, you really see them looking and seeking for that attention, and that attention can be either positive or negative. They'll act out until they get it. And for other students, they might need that control. They might want to control their surroundings, control who they're dealing with. And for both of the attention seekers and the controllers, a really good place to start is really with the parents and at home, and to see if this behavior is consistent with what's happening in school. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have the students that are trying to avoid something, or they're trying to escape from something, and oftentimes this can really be tied to an activity at hand. So maybe reading is particularly difficult, or perhaps testing creates a great deal of anxiety for a student. And for these students, implementing some of the data gathering that we're going to talk about today will be really great to find a trend, to be able to start to predict student behavior. And last but not least, this is what I think is one of the most important ones, is to really understand sensory regulation. And to be honest with you, the best person you can learn from this is probably your occupational therapist. So your OT should be your best friend. As adults, we have learned to handle or really process our energy and our emotions. So if I'm upset, I might go and walk around the block. Or if I have a ton of energy, I might go and work out at the gym. Well, for our students, and especially our younger students, they might not be at the point where they understand their bodies enough to have those strategies for coping with things like frustration or anger or anxiety. And as a teacher, it's really our job to help them recognize what their body needs. So moving on, now that we've looked at understanding where the behavior can come from, let's now try to identify student behavior. When you're analyzing student behavior, it's really important to be specific and describe what it looks like. So if I have a student named Michael and he is acting out in class, I don't want to just say that Michael is disrespectful or aggressive, because those two words, though they do describe his behavior, they don't really depict what it looks like. So we want to be really specific. So if it is disrespectful behavior, is it eye rolling? Are they heavy sighs? Are they loud remarks? Is he stomping his feet? What does it look like? You know, if the behavior is non-compliance, maybe they're not following group directions or individual directions, or perhaps they're preventing others from following directions. And lastly, if it's physical behavior, excuse me, throwing objects or breaking objects, or if they're being physically aggressive towards themselves or others, it's really important to, you know, list what this looks like. Are they hitting? Are they punching? Are they scratching? Are they biting? The more description that you can really put to the behavior when you're documenting it, the better it will be when it comes to really analyzing it. So now that we've tried to understand where the behavior is coming from and what exactly it looks like, here's a way to predict and find trends in student behavior. At our SESI programs, this is a tool that we use to monitor behavior over time. And it's pretty simple. It's called an ABC chart. And the ABC stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. I'm actually going to jump to the next slide so you can see an example of what they look like while I give you just a couple key points about this. The ABC chart can be really useful when you're putting together, for instance, a functional behavior analysis or even a behavior support plan. So this is great data to have. It's really important to include the time and day that the activity, and also the activity when it happened. Okay, because you want to find trends. You want to find, is it a particular time of the day? Is it a specific day of the week? And sometimes those things can be linked to simple fixes like hunger or medication. This is an excellent tool to share with both parents or student. It's a great document to have when you're walking into an IEP meeting. But one of my favorite things to do is to really sit down with a student and use this and say, all right, well, here's what I've noticed. Can you tell me why this is happening? And a lot of times you get really great responses from it. Oops, sorry about that. So just to look at this chart, for all intents and purposes, George is going to be our student and Mrs. Smith is going to be the teacher. Like I said, we really want to make sure we document the time and day that the behavior occurred. We want to make sure that we know what activity was going on when the behavior occurred. The antecedent, that's what's going to be what happened right before the behavior. So what may or may not have triggered it. The B is obviously the big behavior. What did it look like? And that's when we're going to be really specific about it. And then the C is the consequence. So what happened after the behavior, or what was the result of the behavior? What did the student get from it? So if I was going to really look at George and in Mrs. Smith's class, I would probably say that it was a combination of some sort of attention or avoidance. It's clear to me that math class is an issue for George. And specifically, if you look at the times, there's a 15-minute range of when he's been acting out. So, I mean, maybe it could be he's hungry, or maybe it could be this is the time of the day where he just didn't get his energy out in the morning, and this is kind of when he's starting to percolate. The more data that you can collect, the more trends you will be able to find, and they'll allow you to be proactive as a teacher. So if I have this and I know, okay, well, math class is going to be really, really hard, I'm going to make sure that all the ducks are in a line and that George is set up to be successful. So now we're going to move on to our tips. Tip number 1, Q-tip. Okay, this may go without saying, but I always like to remind myself of it. We teach because we're passionate. We're passionate about kids. We're passionate about making a difference. And sometimes it's that passion that can create an emotional link to our students, and especially their behavior. So Q-tip stands for quit taking it personally. Don't hold a grudge. We are the solid objects in our students' lives, so we can't be the ones that hold grudges against them. Your mantra as a teacher should be, every day is a new day. Our students really need to know that they can walk in with a clean slate and they can start fresh every single day. And last but not least, greet them every morning with a smile. It's a great way to start your day, but it's an even better way to start theirs. Tip number 2. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so this triangle that you see right here was a theory of human motivation that was developed in the 40s by a psychologist by the name of Abraham Maslow. His theory is basically a hierarchy that states that the needs and the ideas at the top of the pyramid cannot be achieved until the ones at the bottom are. So for us teachers, we want to ask ourselves, are their basic needs being met? Are my students eating? Are they drinking enough? Are they getting enough sleep? Are they wearing proper attire? And I mean, this could be as simple as if it's 90 degrees outside and the kid's wearing 3 sweatshirts, that might be an issue. Medication. Is it something that's time released? Is it something that they've taken without eating? You want to make sure that all these physiological needs are really met before you can expect your students to be successful. Tip number 3. What is hearing versus what is listening? They sound very similar, but they're very different. It's extremely important to teach and review listening skills and make sure that our students actually know the difference. So hearing, as we all know, can sometimes go in one ear and out the other. But listening is really paying attention. It's thinking about what you hear, processing it, and really doing something with it. So one of the things I like to do is have actual listening rules. And the best thing to do is to discuss these with your students, make sure that they know what they are, and consistently model them for them. So always talk about, what does it look like to listen? What does it sound like to listen? Ways that you can do this is, kind of have a checklist and say, if you're listening, you're sitting up straight. Or if you're listening, you're looking at the speaker. If you're listening, you're keeping your body still. Or if you're listening, you're keeping your mouth quiet. All these things are really important that you can start, really at any point in the school year, but it's great if you can do it in the beginning and then keep it as that consistent reminder throughout the day for your students. So tip number 4, on to motivation. And these are some of the things that when I talked about they might take a little bit of extra time, this is kind of where it comes in. But to know your students and to really learn how to work best with them, you got to find out what motivates them. And I mean, one of the easiest ways is to have a genuine conversation outside the classroom. Find out what their likes are, what their dislikes are, what their family's like, what they think about school. That's one of the best starting places where you can really start from. I always like to give out student surveys. So maybe this is something you do in the beginning of the year where you can find out what kind of field trips they'd like to go on, what kind of class or what kind of individual rewards they might like, or even as simple as finding out what kind of books they like to read. Student surveys are great, and our kids will give us the answers, which is really the best thing that we can go off of. This is a great one too, making the troublemaker your assistant. Sometimes the troublemaker really just wants attention. So if they're motivated by that attention. So if you make them your assistant, it keeps them, 1, close to you, but 2, it makes them feel really important. And last but not least, making sure that, when we find out what kids are motivated for, but we also want to teach goal set and teach them what the difference is between short-term and long-term goals. At SESI, every one of our students has a personal goal of the day, which is, documented on their point sheet. So, I mean, their goals might be as simple as I raise my hand before I speak, or I might need to ask for a break if I need one, or I have to stay in my assigned area. It's really important to teach kids, how to set goals, how to attain them, how to maybe set benchmarks. And if you have students with special education needs, you can also really use their own IEP to do this too. Making sure that they understand their own IEP goals is great. Tip number 5. Having some sort of classroom management system is key. At SESI, we have a level system that's based off of colors. So gold is the top, and then it kind of goes down from blue, green, yellow to red at the bottom. And with our level system, we have point sheets. And so every day, every student gets a point sheet, and their behavior is documented by the half hour. They either earn points or they lose points. Another part of our management system that's really wonderful is the level that a student's on. It corresponds to the amount of SESI dollars that student is going to get. And it's not real money, but it's what we call SESI money. And our students keep track of their money each day, what they earn, what they spend, and they keep a checkbook. And this is great for those transition and life skills too. But they keep their checkbook, and then they can use their money for things, for example, to buy from our school store. Maybe they want to buy an iTunes gift card. Maybe they want to buy a baseball hat or perhaps a fidget toy that they've been really wanting to get. That's what we do at our SESI program. However, there are other ways of developing a classroom management system that can work too. You can have a token economy. So a token economy is basically a system of behavior modification that's based on positive reinforcement of a targeted behavior. Another way to target behavior is to create a behavior contract for a student. If you're working on something specific, create a contract with that student, make it really individualized, and make sure that they know what they're working on and when they know what they can possibly get from that contract. However, when in doubt, here are kind of the rules to go off of. Every classroom should make sure that rules are clear, that they're understood, and that they're posted. I always love to allow students to take part in actually creating the rules in the classroom. Every classroom should support positive behavior. So making sure that there is a lot of praise and that positive behavior is both modeled and encouraged. Every classroom should also prevent inappropriate behavior. And the easiest way to do this is to have lessons that are enriched and they're interesting, and that when kids are on task, they can't really get in trouble. Every classroom should also guide and redirect misbehavior. So again, modeling that appropriate behavior, what's expected. And last but not least, every class should have consequences. So one important thing with this is the consequence should really be applicable to what the issue at hand is. So for example, if a student throws a pencil across a classroom, they shouldn't automatically get extra homework. There's really no link there. Something that might be more appropriate would be having the student go pick that pencil up and perhaps apologizing to the rest of the class. Tip number 6, communication is so key. Getting buy-in from home is really what will make the world go round. Making sure that both home and school are on the same page, I can't tell you how important it is. We've all been there where we work so hard every day, day in and day out to get our kids to a second point or to get them to a certain point, and they go home and it's almost like it just gets undone. So having that buy-in from home is a way to really make sure that that doesn't happen. ways that you can do that is to have constant communication. Maybe it's phone calls, maybe it's emails, maybe for some parents it's even text messages. And that's important too, finding out what mode of communication a parent really prefers. Maybe it's having a daily journal that comes back and forth. This was one of the things that I love to do with my challenging students, was have a daily journal that I would write in at the end of the day. It would go home with the student, the parent would write in it at night, and then it would come back in the morning. It's a great way to let the parent know what's going on, but also the parent can let you know what's going on too. So if Michael walks in the morning and he's not talking to anyone, you don't have to rush to make that phone call to find out what's going on. You can just simply pick up the daily journal and read, and it might say, Michael didn't sleep last night, or Michael had a fight with his sister, or, you know, there's a fire in the neighborhood and Michael was listening to the fire trucks all night. Whatever it is, it would be there right for you to understand, and then you can kind of work through him throughout the day with how to get back on track. Another thing that's important is having consistent communication. So using the same language, and I'm not talking about using English or Spanish as far of a language. I'm talking about if you're working on something with a student, making sure that that same language is going to be used at home too. So for example, if I am working on, for, I don't know, maybe a tone of voice, I might want to say, you're at a level 1, you're at a 2, you're at a 3. And making sure that those parents have those same words to use at home so it can be reinforced. And lastly, making sure that there is positive communication. This is one of the most important things. Don't just make the negative phone calls. The positive ones are just as important, and I promise you they'll make the negative ones easier. So it's, you know, a parent sees the phone ring and it's not just the dreaded phone call from the teacher. You know, it might be a good one. They never know. So they're always going to want to pick up the phone. Tip number 7, utilizing your peers. So it's really important to create an atmosphere of understanding. When behavior happens, it can be awkward. It doesn't have to be, though. It doesn't have to be the elephant in the room. Students will really appreciate it if you talk through it with them and use it as a learning experience. One great thing you can do is enlist the peers to support you. If you have a particularly challenging student, maybe he or she would benefit from an older peer mentor. That way they're getting some individualized attention, and that's from an appropriate peer, and they're also modeling appropriate behavior. So those kinds of relationships can be really helpful when dealing with challenging students. You might want to try to use the group for positive redirection. Just an example for you, Success Schools is our alternative ed arm of our company, and one of the routine practices that they have with their students is every day they have a daily assembly, which is basically a group process that utilizes peer relationships to shape behavior. You know, students are actually expected to redirect their peers in an appropriate way. And this is the kind of thing that takes time, it takes teaching, and it takes modeling to make it work to really benefit the classroom, but it can happen. All right, tip number 8, don't argue. And I wish I could remember this in all facets of my life, just not in the classroom. But don't waste your time and energy arguing, because when you argue with a challenging student, it basically just begins a power struggle, and that's the last thing that you want. You can use a lot more than just, you know, verbal prompts. Sometimes you might feel like you're that broken record, saying the same thing over and over again. There's other things you can do. You can use a visual, and you can also use gestural prompts to reinforce those verbal directions. So a couple of just examples here for you guys. I've used, you know, you can laminate a word sign, and maybe it would say chill out, and it could be for you know, a chill out card for a student or perhaps a group who may be escalating. And all you have to do is simply hand them the card. It won't interrupt your lesson. It won't interrupt the rest of the group. And that student knows what that card means. It's important to have that discussion ahead of time, but it's a way to really kind of go about the lesson, go about what's happening in the classroom without having to stop and give that verbal prompt. Another thing that I've seen used before that works really well, I've seen a teacher use, it was just a yellow card, a yellow piece of paper, and that meant that her class was getting too loud. It was, what happened was it was linked to an actual consequence. So if that teacher held up that yellow card, that meant that all of her students had to stay 1 minute after school. And over time, it decreased a lot because they did not like that. So that was, I mean, a great way for her to, and she didn't even have to say anything. It was wonderful. Another thing you can do is you can learn forms of sign language. So maybe how to sign hold on, or yes or no, or sit down, or quiet down. Whatever you do, the most important thing to remember is just do not engage in an argument. All right, so we're almost done here, guys. Tip number 9, OT is your friend, and OT stands for occupational therapy. Like I said before, when in doubt, your occupational therapist should be your best friend. It's important to really understand sensory integration, but also understand how you can implement it into the classroom. Because yes, it can happen in the OT room, but the child's not always in an OT room. When you can really find ways to incorporate it in the classroom, that's when that child will really make those strides and become successful. So just to kind of in a nutshell, when a child has a sensory processing disorder, it's really hard for them to receive information from the environment. It's not organized as well in the brain, and it results in processing problems and inappropriate behavior for the task at hand. So when you think about some of your students, and we see this a lot more in younger students than older students, however, it does exist in older students as well. But when you think about your fidgety students, so the kids that are always moving around, you might want to think about allowing some alternative seating for them. So maybe use a wiggle seat or a tea stool, or allow them to sit on a yoga ball. I've even seen kids that lay on their bellies and read and write on their bellies, and it helps them a lot because they're so grounded, and the pressure from the ground really helps them. Another thing, students who always have something in their mouth. They might be the students that are constantly chewing their pens or their pencils, or their erasers, or they might even result to chewing their own clothing. Give in to them a little bit and recognize their need for oral movement. Allow gum in your classroom. Allow chewing straws. One thing that can help tremendously is simple things like blowing up a balloon. Another thing that's incredibly important as a teacher is to remember to incorporate frequent OT and motor breaks. As a teacher, I never like to be just standing and not doing anything but talking. So I always like to really incorporate a lot of movement. So maybe every 10 or 15 minutes we all stop and do some push-ups, or we stop and do jumping jacks or wall push-ups. If you have that one child who you can just tell is starting to percolate, a great thing to do is ask them to run an errand for you and make them carry something heavy. Give them 4 or 5 big, thick dictionaries to take down to the front desk, and I guarantee you will see a different child when you come back. It'll really give them that input that they need. A simple thing could be just ask a child to come up and erase the board. That quick movement and that task at hand and get back will help them get back in their seat and get back to really being able to pay attention. And this is great for younger kids too. Things don't always have to be pen and pencil. I think we forget that these days, and you can be really creative. You can do handwriting, or you can do math problems, and do it in shaving cream, do it in Jello, do it in sand, do it in things that have or give that tactile input that will, one, be fun for kids, but two, it'll really give them what they need to allow them to focus on making appropriate letters and really figuring out math problems. And last but not least, oops, sorry about that. Last but not least, you don't want to be that stoic and stationary teacher. Incorporating kinesthetic movement into a lesson is so valuable. And just to give you an example, say you were teaching a lesson on vocabulary. Instead of having students write out, vocabulary definitions on note cards, have them actually act out the meaning of the word. It'll be way more fun for them, and they will actually learn a lot more from it. And because of the movement, they'll be able to kind of get through the lesson. Anything that you can do in your lesson that incorporates rhythmical or sustained movement is great. Anything like marching or stomping. And again, this is sometimes geared towards more of the younger age, but you can really do that with all kids. But like I said, when in doubt, your OT should absolutely be your best friend. They will have all of these strategies for you. All right. And our last tip here is you versus the board. Having some sort of visual agenda on the board to start the class is really a great way to let the students know what to expect. When you make it you versus the board, you actually join forces with your students. It becomes you and the students versus the board, allowing them to check off each part as it becomes complete, and even having something at the end that they can use as earn time if time allows. This is one of the best things to do, just to kind of give your students a picture of what they're in for. And a great thing to do is to use that language. Say, hey guys, look at everything we have to accomplish today. I really need you to sit down so we can get started and get this done. And also, one of the little benefits of it, as a teacher, it helps you stay on track too. So here we go, guys. Here are our 10 tips. Here is a basic summary of them. Just remember, the most important thing to do is to keep that bag of tricks current and keep it updated, and always add to it when you can, because you never know. With one thing that works with a student may not work with another student. And so you're going to have to always, it's almost like a revolving door, keep it going. So thank you guys. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for taking the chance to listen today. If you have any questions about the webinar, or if you have any interest in seeing SESI's programs firsthand, I'd be happy to show them to you. We have schools all across the country and we love visitors. So please remember, you could email me at any point. Have a great day, and it is almost Friday.